Isn't it?
And having it on its own platform. Because what would happen if it was on this thing? People's
Oh,
scratching, moving, shuffling papers with way more detection.
huh.
And then we tried it on that cart over there, but that was too high. It stood
Yeah.
up like,
Oh. So who'd you steal this from?
Elisa found it down at the town offices, so I don't know what they were doing with it previously, but
Well, Happy New Year, guys. I don't
Happy
know if
New
that's-
Year, huh?
yeah, great to see you. Let's see, what you guys do for the holiday?
Nothing.
No?
We had 3 of our 4 kids and their partners come up.
Nice.
Not on Christmas, but they kind of straddled a little bit, but that was
Yeah.
fun to have them because last Christmas we didn't have anybody. So
Oh, yeah.
that was nice.
Yeah, we had 2 out of our 3. Which is nice. My son married a Iowa girl.
Oh, wow.
And so-
All the way the opposite way, right?
Yeah, they drive out there. What a community that they have. The population is like less than 1,000. Actually, 600 is their town population. But that's farm country out there.
You know it. Yeah.
And so I really get along with her parents well, especially her father. And he has these gardens, right? And I said he's cheating because he puts a spade in the dirt out there, and down it goes.
Black earth. Yeah.
Black earth,
Beautiful.
no stones. So he was at our house in Topsfield. I said, come on.
Sure,
We're
it's
not-
like,
We went out in my backyard. I brought it. I said, push it in. Can't push it in. It's all gravel.
Rocks, yeah.
Yeah. So I always say he's a cheater. But I mean, the tomatoes and corn and, doing it around here is work.
Yes.
Happy New Year. My second son and his wife are expecting their first child, our first grandchild.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's very exciting.
In March, and they were supposed to go visit her family in Ohio for Christmas. And they decided not to because they were too worried about COVID.
Yeah.
Omicron's just starting up.
Yeah.
She's got 2 sisters that are not vaccinated and won't vaccinate.
Yep.
And she said, you know what, I'm not gonna take this chance.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, it's Christmas time. You don't need to be driving from Rochester to New York to anywhere. Because
Yeah, for
who knows
sure.
when the snowstorms are gonna come in. So.
I mean, this is a common story that you've heard a million times, but we have friends that are anti-vaxxers.
Yeah.
So husband and wife and
One of life's mysteries. I mean, he knows,
Yeah.
but he.
Somebody knows,
It's
I'm
just
sure.
Rodney is the athletic director. so
Yeah.
that's not
good,
so-
good.
He's a real good communicator, but.
Had 2 out of the 2 out of 3 kids home, so that was nice.
Yeah, no game.
How's it going?
What?
How's it going?
I said the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, a little bit, getting there, so. Getting there.
Hi, Rob. How you doing?
Well, how are you?
Pretty good.
Vince, how you doing?
I'm all right.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Eric? How you been?
All right.
Good news is we have heat.
I saw the 2 dead
About an
river
hour ago,
trucks
we had
out
no
there, and I wondered what was going on.
That's 2 buildings in town. EVS ran out of oil today.
Really.
They really.
Well, it's gonna be cold next couple of days.
Yeah,
So
tonight.
Hopefully,
Tonight.
they had not had it delivered by the end of the day. So hopefully somebody found a tank to deliver.
And of course, when you're running out, it creates all these downstream problems, the
Oh.
air in the lines.
Yeah.
And
They
they
got
got
evaporation.
sediment in the tank because.
Yes.
it's completely empty.
You know who the fuel supplier is?
I don't know. I just know that I came home and said, yeah, we didn't have heat today because they found out they didn't have oil.
Yeah,
Are they paying their bills?
I hope so. Interestingly, my propane company in Wakefield actually installed special thing on the tank so they can actually read the remotely.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
It's
That's
like a
nice.
cellular modem,
Wow.
something. That's pretty cool.
What company do you use? use?
We use Young's, which is now AmeriGas. Used to be Young's in White River.
Uh-huh.
Bought out by AmeriGas. I think it's like one of the biggest propane companies in.
Do you have some agendas, Rob?
Yes.
Hey, Bridget, how are you?
I forgot to sign one, but-
You need it, Virginia?
Hello.
Well,
Hi, Phil.
Hello.
I got all my stuff. I printed and I read and I read and I printed and I printed and I read.
you're an A student.
I don't know about that.
I'll give you an
Hi, Sealy.
Hello,
Happy New Year.
hi, everybody.
A.
Thank you.
2022, who would have thought?
Here we go.
It just seems like the other day, the Y2K was a problem, right?
Gone.
Y2K.
I was thinking about that.
What I'd give for Y2K dollars.
Really?
Today was the new manager's first day.
Oh, is it?
That's good.
They had a staff meeting. I missed
My
it. I
oldest
wasn't
kid
here
was
today.
on the Y2K.
They had a staff meeting,
or
so we'll see.
whoever it was who was working.
Yeah, I
Feedback is tomorrow. Are you with it?
No, I was at work.
He's from Claremont, right?
He was the Claremont manager. You're correct.
Yeah.
I think he's originally from the Midwest.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, he did I don't remember where he grew up. He did a career as a firefighter in Idaho. And then moved to Weathersfield, was their town manager for a while, in Claremont. and then was-
How long was he at Claremont?
Just like 3 years.
Oh, sure.
All right, it's 6 o'clock. We're gonna get started.
Rock and roll.
Rock and roll. So I'm gonna call this meeting to order. That's it. Let's go ahead and just do a roll call really quickly. Oh, is Whitney coming?
Whitney said she'd be a little bit late, but we are recording the meeting. So she'll be
Okay.
able to do this.
Great. So I'll just start. Lindsay Smith.
Oh, David Crack. co-chair.
Maynard Southern here.
Ashley Wood,
Forget Labrie.
Brad Rich.
Celia Alfiero,
Eric Russell.
And on Zoom, we have,
Bill Vermeer.
right? And then
Rob Taylor.
Tom please, and Whitney will be here soon. And then we've got our consultant. Randy. Okay, so safe to say that. Great. Welcome, everybody. It is 2022. We made it over the line, right? January 10th. So just real quick agenda review. Does anybody have any things to add to it or proposed changes? Does it look okay for everyone? Great. And we'll proceed. Review and approval of the meeting minutes from 12/27/2021. Does anyone have any substantive changes?
I have no substances changes.
If you have grammatical things, they are important, but those can be
I
emailed.
I have a grammatical thing that I need to find.
Okay,
So just give me a couple of seconds, maybe if somebody else wants to talk first.
I thought they looked good.
okay. Does anybody else have any other comments on the? If it's just a grammatical change, we can submit that right to Whitney.
Yeah, it was one
It's
weird sentence.
oh, okay.
Oh, it's misspelled.
Really?
my fingers are so.
It's supposed to be very cold today.
Minus cold.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like a high of 3
I
tomorrow or
don't know, I'll just
Yeah.
submit it to Whitney offline.
Yeah,
okay?
so grammatical changes are, as long as it doesn't change the content and the meaning of the sentence. We do want them to be correct, but, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Okay,
Second.
seconded by Brad. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So as is with a, I guess, with a grammatical change. Anybody opposed? I'm abstaining. And
I'll abstain.
So 3 abstained.
So that for Whitney's benefit, that's Ashley, Eric, and Lindsay abstaining.
Abstaining, yes, great. All right, co-chair report. So I'll go first on this one. Maybe some good news. I don't know, depending on how you look at it. It's not set in stone, but I was at the select board meeting last Monday. I will say there's a 99.9% chance that the deliberative session of town meeting, where we would want to present anything, is going to be moved until May. That I know 2 of our select board folks in particular have no interest in being in a room full of people. They'd rather be outside with the Omicron variant. I don't think that from what I've heard, that the gym at EVS is not actually really available still.
It's got stuff.
It's got stuff in it. So that's where we have it. There was a suggestion for someone, the former moderator suggested doing a Zoom hybrid, and no. So as the current moderator, no. He doesn't quite understand how.
So you would do it, do you have a date for May?
So we're looking at either the very last weekend of April, so April 30th or May 7th.
Okay.
We're trying to get it right there, like
I heard.
where it's going to be, like as soon as it's going to be potentially tolerable to be outside. Last year it was freezing that weekend.
It
whereas-
was freezing.
Whereas 3 weeks before that, it was 75 degrees out. So we don't know, but it's still, someone always throws out like, we're New Englanders. I'm like, yeah, you stand in one cold spot for 6 hours, but
It was rough.
it was rough.
Doable, but rough.
But that's what we're looking at. So that gives us a little bit of some breathing room on some things, just to put that out there. It does throw off some things.
I
Rob,
was just
did you
gonna
have-
say, on that exact subject, we went in Plainfield, we went first weekend in June,
Mhm.
and it was gorgeous.
So
month
maybe
later.
I'll throw that out there. They wanted to, they
Delays the
didn't make,
budget.
it really is the select board that sets the date. That's like their main job in election, like for town meeting, is to secure the time, place and date. Although it's typically already set. But they wanted to, see what happens, but I know that they're not. They don't want to be in a room, and plus, again, we don't have our normal inside space. So, and other logistics, moving it to the high school, and we have to provide transportation. There's a lot of different rules and regulations about it. So they really like having it outside.
So,
only
so
part
it's
that
outside,
Yeah, so it looks like we'll be doing the tent outside thing again. is what
no
they're-
Zoom.
No Zoom. Unfortunately, Zoom just doesn't allow for, you can't vote that way. So we would have to,
Because we
Huh?
did before.
not for town meeting. Town meeting, we've not done Zoom.
Yeah, we had people parking the cars.
Yeah.
We have
right.
people park in the
Oh,
cars.
okay.
Right,
I thought
and,
that
and,
was over
which
the
which I
radio.
know Maynard has done. Huh?
And it was over the
It
radio.
was over
Yeah.
the radio. And so they're there present, and we have people running around to pick up your ballots.
Right,
But
right.
we have not done
They
it
were the
over
only
Zoom.
ones that were warm.
Yes.
The people running around with the stickers.
Yes.
That wasn't cold.
You weren't there.
I did not have, I did not have
I
enough.
looked for you.
ballots.
It was my
Wherever it
first
was,
one.
I was.
And I-
It was my first one.
And I was even worse dressed when I
Keeps our
arrived.
bugs
And then
Yeah,
luckily,
you were not dressed right.
it was not, I was really warm at home.
Petition everybody sitting in the room.
Anyways, so that
Sign
just,
the
just to
budget.
put that out
Just so
there,
you're-
it's not, we need to stay on this pace, and I know that we've, David and Brandy have talked a little bit. I wasn't there on that conversation, but we still want to keep on our pace, but that it does, we need to make sure that we submit something so that we get a space holder on the warrant, at least to present. But that by March, like all those dates are the same, but we just push out
But zoning gets voted in.
Zoning gets voted on voting Tuesday will still happen the second Tuesday of March. Ballot voting is still gonna happen the same way.
And that's all. the
That'll be
zoning.
March 8th. And that'll be, yeah, because you're in and out. So zoning will be voted on, and whatever offices are up for election are
Yeah.
gonna be voted on.
On the
So,
first one.
okay,
Cool.
yeah, so just to let everyone know that that's, again, I don't see that not happening.
I have nothing to add
Okay,
for
Great.
once.
hey. look at
Whitney
that.
has just joined us too. She's coming in remotely. just
Oh, okay.
FYI.
Excellent.
Hi, Whitney. I don't know if she can you hear us, Whitney?
Yeah, sorry. I have a double monitor situation here and my mouse is not cooperating, but hello.
Hi there. Okay. So on to new business. So we are just going to do a quick housing and land use, a preliminary conversation. And instead of doing a whole dive in, because if you noticed, you didn't get any chapters, and I dropped the ball on housing. I was pretty sick over the holidays and just didn't get anything done. Been fighting not COVID. I promise. I've had 4 or 5 COVID tests, so in the past 2 weeks. Not that, but have not gotten it written. And so we are still gathering that information. Brandy, do you have anything to add about housing right now, or things that we need to?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. So you guys didn't get any of the things I sent out at the end of the week, is that correct?
Well, we did.
No, we did.
We did.
We did.
Okay. Okay.
I
So that's the housing chapter in progress. So it's the start, but there's still a bunch of data and analysis to be done to sort of go back in and fill that out. And I think we have managed to, between Rob and I and several other people, managed to get all of that stuff finally pulled together towards the end of last week. So I've got what I need to crunch and continue working on that. But I thought that it might be useful to talk a little bit through some of the housing and demographic data that's the basis for this chapter, and get you guys familiarized with it. And I can put that up on the screen, I think. So I think you got these spreadsheets.
Yep.
And so this first spreadsheet, which has information about population, households, and housing units for you in Enfield, and then for your neighboring communities, is it's a wealth of information to sort of get a picture of what's going on. And I think we talked a few meetings ago, the idea of I think perhaps maybe when we were back looking at the vision statement, there was discussion of the population trend, and the towns not growing in terms of population. And I suggested that we really, from a planning perspective, we want to focus in on households. And so that's the number that's highlighted in yellow here. So you're seeing those counts from 1960 through the most recent census in 2020. And so there's been very small, but some increase in households in Enfield in the last 10 years, whereas the population and actually number of housing units have gone down. And so those are interesting bits of information about what's going on in terms of the demographics of the community, with households getting smaller, perhaps some of the supply of housing that was seasonal becoming year-round, things like that. Those are clues as to what is happening out there. So the other
Brandy, this is Brad. Just a quick question. Have you seen this type of trend that we're seeing with the population in Enfield? Have you seen that with other towns that you've worked with, or is this unusual?
You're not unusual. I would say certainly the housing growth rate looks like it's slowed perhaps a bit more than it has in some of the surrounding towns, but they're all slowing in some ways. So it's in line with the overall trend. You might be seeing a little bit more of a dramatic difference here in Enfield, but it's not like it's moving in a different direction than sort of the broader region and other communities in the region. So I guess that's how I would could look at that. There is something very interesting going on with the housing unit numbers, which you can see here. We don't have a number for 1960, but starting in 1970. I don't know what just happened there. Let's try that again. Okay. I've got to keep Excel up front. Okay. So, you know, you obviously see that big increase coming on in those early decades, and then the rate of increase is getting smaller in the 1990s and smaller again in the 2000s. And then from 2010 to 2020, there's actually a decline in the number of housing units. Now, the question is whether this is bad census counting or there really are fewer housing units. I mean, it's obviously not a huge number here. We're talking about 40 housing units difference. But so far, you have permitting records, and you have the assessments, property assessment records. So I'm trying to use those to get some sense as to whether this number from 2020 in terms of number of housing units is an accurate reflection. I think it might be that it is a little low, but it's not going to get very high. But we're not going to turn it around enough to make it seem like you've added a lot of housing units, that's for sure. If nothing else, you're pretty flat in terms of housing growth. But that's one of the things that hopefully we'll be able to check up on before we come back around again to look at this, is to sort of figure out whether this information from the 2020 count of housing units is an accurate reflection.
This is Rob. I was going to just say that we do have the building inspector is working on a project to sort of review all of our permitting for the last 10 years, essentially, and kind of check that, because we all here in this building felt like that was not accurate. I know that you and I talked about that. So he's going through, because question is, when somebody pulls a demo permit, does it reverse a housing unit when it's really just a demoing of a kitchen or something like that? So we're really combing through the data there ourselves, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some more clarity there, because it is the data that comes from the building inspector, as we've discussed. I know you and I had that conversation before. I think he gets a quarterly communication from the census, and they're asking him about building permits. And of course, he's only been here a year, but he's combing now through the last 10 years. And so we'll have some more clarity from Enfield's data and how it relates to the census data shortly. I just wanted to let you know on that.
And Brandy, this is Maynard. I on the other hand, if you notice, Enfield and Hanover and Canaan have very similar stagnant numbers. So, I mean, perhaps there's a census thing going on here, but Lebanon's the only one that seems to be growing, and then they're absorbing the increase in the households in the Upper Valley.
I don't think that the data is going to turn around enough to show you that you've actually, had a significant increase in housing units, but you might not actually be negative. It's also possible the 2010 number was a little high. I've just started working through the property assessment information. I've confirmed about somewhere in the 2,300 range of housing units, but that's going to end up undercounting things that don't show up very easily in those records, like accessory apartments and things like that, which are not necessarily all neatly recorded in an obvious place where you can see them. But, you know, I can't now remember exactly what the number was. It was 23 something. I was up to you know, I think that's a bit low, but the odds of getting that, you know, I don't think it's 300 units low, for instance. You know, it may be 100, but probably not a lot more. So, yeah, in any event, I think what you can take away from this is that the perception that there hasn't been, you know, how growth in housing is borne out by these numbers. And then if you looked at the other tab on that spreadsheet and you sort of group it out into 20-year ranges, so you compare what happened between 1970 and 1990 with what's happened between 2000 and 2020, you can see that really dramatic difference. So, you know, definitely the numbers in the last 20 years are smaller in all the communities, but this is a really big difference in Enfield between that sudden burst of housing that got built in that 20-year range, and that then the decline, which started, you know, into the 1990s. By the time actually when you were working on the last master plan, there was already concern that the growth in housing was stopping. So if you actually go back and read the 1995 housing or master plan, you can see that in there. So it was already evident at that point that there had been a slowdown. So that slowdown has carried on. And then the point made that Lebanon is the community that has been adding. I haven't gone in and looked at it, but to confirm this, but the most likely cause for that is going to be almost entirely multi-unit housing. So that growth will, you know, just knowing from living here and driving around of what's been built in Lebanon, almost all of that growth in housing is going to be a result of those projects that have built mostly multi-unit housing. So I'm going to return back to the big table. So there was one other part of this that I wanted to show you guys to be thinking about from a planning perspective. So this goes through the count and then, you know, the actual absolute change and the percent change. But the other table that's of interest from a planning perspective is the average annual rate of change. First of all, this is a more effective way to sort of compare yourself to others. Because if you start with a really small number and you add a relatively small absolute number to that, you can get a big percent increase. But if you look at it out over this average annual rate, you get a little more comparable in terms of what's happening. But we often look from a planning perspective at growth rates this way. And when this number goes over 2, in terms of households or housing units, that's generally a sign that the rate of growth is really high and probably sort of outstripping the ability of the municipality to manage over time. You know, you're outstripping the infrastructure. You're going to be running into times when, you know, there's not enough space in the schools, those types of things, which it has been a long time since any of us remember having those conversations. But I do remember the times when there was, you know, mobile classrooms parked outside of many schools in the area because they had run out of space, right, in the 1990s, typically. You know, that's what you're looking at with these numbers. And if you're getting below 1%, that's viewed as sort of a stagnant rate of growth and a concern for economic development and things like that there just isn't enough growth to support the local economy. So somewhere the sweet spot is generally thought to be probably 1.5 to 1.8 or something like that. Something in that range is considered kind of a healthy rate of growth that is good for the local economy and still within the, you know, within the ability of the community to manage and assimilate the change over time. So can maintain costs and quality of life and things like that. So when you're looking at those numbers, you can kind of see that you've both gone over that number and under that range, but really haven't had a period when you were sort of comfortably in that midway where you were growing but not too rapidly. So it's kind of an interesting
Brandy, do you take
comparison.
into consideration the events that are going on in history or, you know, every day, like the recession? And do you look at some of those that might pull the
Yes.
numbers
So
down?
the housing numbers are very much tied to economic trends, so broader economic trends in the U.S. economy. So you see the crashes. So you see one in the late 1980s. There's one in the 1990s that happens, and then the Great Recession. There's a lot of analysis that suggests that is a major contributor to the current lack of housing development because of what happened with housing finance in response to the banking crisis. And so it has made the way that houses were kind of financed on spec in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s much less viable now, and that has had some pretty broad implications. So the ability to actually finance residential development is one of those is a major contributing factor to the last 15 years worth of slow housing construction.
Thank you.
Yep. And then the other piece that's important is a demographic one. And I don't have this chart filled out yet, but I'm hoping to actually finish it. You had this chart in your 1995 plan. So we have these numbers for the 1980s, and I think it's possible that we can get them filled in for the 90s, 2000s, and 2010. So what you're really trying to understand here with this chart, and I need to make it bigger, I think, so you can see it, is what's driving population change or not. So you can see, how many births there are in your community and how many deaths over the period of time, and you know what the population change is. So then you know how many people are moving in or out. And you can see when you have those rapid periods of growth, that's usually because people are moving in at high rates. And now, although I don't have these numbers here, what you're going to see, once they get filled in, I'm pretty sure, is that you're going to have net migration out. So instead of people moving in, it's more people moving out to balance off the birth death number, which will still be a positive number.
And that is sort of correlated with the results that I read. What one of the documents you sent out was the biggest problem or whatever in Enfield, and a lot of respondents were complaining about cost of living and just staying here due to taxes and whatever else. So maybe that's driving it too. I don't know.
Yeah. So this is one snapshot of those demographic trends. But community like Enfield, when you had that big surge of housing that got built, and probably it's even more dramatic in a community such as yours, where there really was a sudden spike that was fairly contained and noticeable. Essentially, the people who moved into those houses were roughly the same age at that time, and a good percentage of them have stayed. And so you have a pretty big cohort of people who have been in essentially the same house that they bought perhaps when they were starting a family or had a young family, and are now retirement age, which is one of those things you're seeing with those household numbers going down and down. So a house that had 4 people in it, now has 2. And, you know, the questions we asked on the survey as to whether people thought they would stay or go, as, you know, in the future. Most people, even the people who are in the 55 up age grouping looking forward, thought that they would stay. You know, and there's a number of reasons for that. One is that, we saw that in the comments, some people said, well, yeah, I would look to downsize or find something different, but there isn't anything here for me to move into. And so there's also an issue that starts happening in communities where basically there isn't any turnover in the housing stock, or there isn't that much turnover in the housing stock, because it's a narrow range of what kind of housing is available. And so people just stay with what they've got, because they can't sort of move on to that next type of housing that might be more suitable for their current needs. And so you see that, and it has a lot of implications as well, particularly, you know, what percentage of the population is in the baby boom generation if people stay put. You know, communities are going to suddenly find themselves having a fairly large percentage of the population, you know, 80+ years old, and living in a rural setting. You know, it raises issues about transportation. It raises concerns about being able to afford and keep up property. You know, it's not so easy to keep up a you know, a house in a rural setting, you know, and everything that goes along with that. And so those are interesting questions that sort of touch on other parts of your plan and what your community kind of needs for services and infrastructure going forward. And you know, it also speaks to some housing needs for you know, if there was senior housing, would that lead to more turnover of what, you know, we might classify as kind of family homes that then younger people might move into, and then those household size numbers might go up and you might have more kids for the school and things like that. But those are some of the interrelated bits of planning that come from just really getting an understanding of your housing stock, the demographics of the community, and sort of who's there, what their needs are, and what their sort of long-term outlook and plans are. So in terms of the outlook, people are really happy with their houses in Enfield, and that's actually one of the reasons they want to stay, which we saw in the survey results. Most people are very, very pleased and with where they're living now, and you know, see no reason why they would want to move, and that's interesting. So the very positive outlook on their current home. So that's a positive message for your plan.
It is a positive outlook on people's housing, atypical of communities in the Upper Valley, or typical?
I don't know. It might be interesting to see if we can find some other surveys from some other communities in the Upper Valley and compare. But yeah, you had a pretty overwhelmingly positive assessment of housing, with the exception that, you know, people do have concerns about costs that are going along with that. But the actual, you know, the location of their home and sort of the physical attributes of it and things like that, people are generally pleased with. Now, that's interesting. You know, one of the other things to say about that is that we heard from homeowners primarily. We didn't hear from a lot of renters. If we'd heard from a larger number of renters, we might have gotten a slightly different response. And I've asked similar survey questions in other communities. There's typically a difference in level of satisfaction between the homeowners and the renters. Renters tend to have more concerns or more aspects of their current housing that aren't fully meeting their needs.
I would add, Brandy, just something from my experience, having come to Enfield, previously working in Lebanon. Lebanon would always, and it frustrated me a little bit, but I take it with the perspective of what we've got now, but they would always kind of complain that they were bearing this huge burden of all the growth in housing in the Upper Valley, and city councilors would say, oh, well, the other communities in the Upper Valley need to pull their fair share here. It seems like it's all falling to Lebanon to expand housing, and they talk about somewhere in the vicinity of 1,500 housing units at various stages of approval in Lebanon as we speak. Obviously, Mount Support Road growing like crazy with hospital housing. I would take that, they're also getting huge tax revenue out of all of it. Property tax grand list is going up. And they reap a lot of the benefits out of it. But, I would say, just to throw that perspective out, obviously, like you said, we're not really hearing much from renters, and we're not really hearing from people that would like to move here. I'm sensitive to, because I've been to a bunch of those breakfasts where they talk about the housing situation in the Upper Valley being, really sort of critical, where there's somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 to 5,000 units shortage in the Upper Valley. And
More like 10.
anecdotally, you'll hear, when you go to Dartmouth Hitchcock and you talk to the nurses, they're driving 90 miles to get to work because they can't find housing around here. And there's a little of that at play, obviously. I guess I just want to sort of throw it out there, because there will be those that'll say, oh, we don't need any more housing in Enfield at all. But I would say that there's probably, it's a happy medium. We gotta strike a balance. There's probably people that would say we need more housing. And I think, it's coming. We've started to hear from developers on a few major projects here that could be significant in terms of numbers, over 100 units.
Oh, wow.
So we'll see.
So one of the points you raised about Lebanon is interesting. They have been taking the bulk of the increase in housing, that we saw on that table from the last 20 years. But they're reaching a point where there's a really strong, there's really a strong cry for open space preservation in Lebanon. And they've come up with a fairly robust open space plan that says they want to keep. I can't now remember. I helped work on this plan, and I did the page layout and stuff, but I should be able to remember the number. I think they landed on 78% open space. It's somewhere between 70 and 80. I think the final number they landed on was 78% open space, which means that they've really got a limited supply of land that they are targeting for greenfield development. So, hundreds of acres, not thousands of acres. So one, and like you said, Rob, there's a number of projects in the pipeline going through that's on some of that land that's in the area that they're saying they would still develop. And after that, they really just want to do redevelopment and infill. And they want to maintain basically the 70% of their area within the city boundaries as open space. That could change the dynamics regionally quite a bit if they actually implement some sort of growth management and zoning to go forward with and implement that goal that they've come up with. They also, like you, have a pretty large amount of protected open space. So, the resources in terms of the amount of land available in Lebanon are not endless for new housing. So that's an interesting question for you guys as the next ring out, is what does that mean for you in 10 years, in 20 years? And certainly that you have water and sewer is a critical factor in this as well, because it is possible that you could absorb a larger project. You know, I've done a bunch of housing related work in Vermont, and I don't think the market dynamics are going to be hugely different. So this number probably holds. The affordable housing developers that work in Vermont won't look at projects that are building less than 20 units at a time. So, you know, it just doesn't work. You know, it doesn't come out at the end when they do their pro forma. Doesn't pencil out if it's smaller than that. And that has a lot to do with federal funding sources, actually, and how projects those affordable housing projects get done. And to be honest, the private developers that are building market rate rental housing are sort of in the same range. They're not doing smaller buildings than that. And so you're not going to do any of that in a place that doesn't have water and sewer. If you're looking at building 20 units at a time, it's got to be on water and sewer. So that you have water and sewer means that at some point you do have the capability of being in that game for that scale of development. Now, whether you want to be or not is a question for your land use regulations, your zoning and such. But it's conceivably possible that, in one of the reasons perhaps, Rob, that you have been hearing from developers is that you actually do have that resource. That's one of the things that's necessary for them to do projects that can be financed.
I think the one thing that I noticed in reading a lot of the responses, and I don't have an answer of how to fix this, but knowing how much I have learned since becoming involved, not just with this, but in general, there are a lot of people that still don't have a full understanding of some of these things. It's, you know, I want open spaces. I don't want this, you know, they don't want more people, but they don't want their taxes to go up. They want school choice. Like, they don't understand how things work, and it's not that simple. And I guess my thought is, how do you fix, or how do you help educate? Like, what is something town initiative, and again, you're not gonna tell people something they don't want to hear and they're not willing to listen to, but if I could see anything, it would be helping people become more involved, but also understanding how their town works a bit more, or how things, even on a basic level. I mean, I grew up in Canaan. My father still lives there. I get into talking about some of these things. He's like, I don't want to know the details. He'll go vote for certain things, and he doesn't want to get, you know, into the weeds. And I get it. It's a lot. The more you learn, the more you want to learn. And then it just feels very overwhelming. But I mean, even reading this, some of the comments, I don't know if everybody read some of the summaries. My favorite is the capital letter one. And understanding that's not what a master plan is for. We have no control over that scenario. So which one was it? Oh, there's one that's talking about the fire chief, and
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
it's all in capital letters. And
Oh, that's what you meant by
Yeah,
capital
yeah.
letters. I
Well, not all of
Oh, I see it. Yep.
the bottom part of it, which I find interesting for multiple reasons. But so I just kind of sit there and go, how do we help educate our citizens to just be more informed participants, voters? We're giving them all of this information. I don't guarantee they're even going to look at it or get it, but we're trying. I don't know. This is like the biggest frustration for me. The more I get involved, is just trying to figure out how you get to people nicely, kindly, to help offer them information that they can also absorb. I mean, I'm not talking about high level stuff, because none of us want to hear it. But it just, yeah, there were some interesting responses. so far.
I think you'll find that in any town.
Yeah. It's true.
I can remember when I did the Conservation Commission, that's what we would be saying all, if they only learn why this is good, you know, or this and that, but 20 years, there's some people just don't wanna know.
No,
They
they
don't
don't.
wanna know, they don't care, you know, that it's just the way it is.
Well, and there's a lot of just like any single thing means more money, which means more, you know what I mean, like
Right.
flowers.
That's my favorite. That was where I was
Right?
like, you don't
Like-
understand who's doing some of these things. Like
Right,
the town
that
doesn't
people-
pay for
people-
the flowers.
Yeah.
The EVA
Yeah,
does.
people don't know that like, and that's an all volunteer group,
Yeah.
and it makes the town look nice, and it brings people here, and it gives pride. But like all these, or sidewalks, or all these little tiny nitpicky things, and I can think of a town meeting where one of our favorite town residents who does his own research wanted, you know, to not do the whole, don't pave the whole boat launch, but only do this 200 feet, and then we can save that, you know, and it's just like, but anyways, but that's, it's all because, you know, and unfortunately, it's a bigger system of, so any type of improvement or it's just town business. And when you have everybody that's all into the budget, but they only come in at what? When they only drop in at
To, like,
this
0.
moment and don't understand that like
Yeah.
departments need to run and people need to get paid and all of this kind of stuff. And so,
Yeah. I know
Um,
Eric here's my crush.
yeah.
I mean, I go for fun as a citizen and now an employee. I don't see people.
And even in the budget committee, they go line by line. So, but it's like, I don't know if we can, and we're not gonna come up with the best solution for every single person. So what is the like, you know, it's always trying to me, like, how do we, what do we figure out what's that bliss point? So that Brandy's statistic of like the comfortable range of growth.
Yeah.
Like if we can talk about those kinds of things, like here's a comfortable range of growth that we can sustain, but you know, Enfield isn't infinite. We have a limited amount of space that we can develop on and keep the character that we want to keep, you know, and that to me is trying to figure out what that is. And so that it's not, when you hear you know, 100-unit place, you're like, "Ah," right? But 100-unit place might not be bad depending on how it's done and where it's done, if it's at the right cost. I mean, how many
A
housing,
lot of families.
how many housing units are on Anderson Hill?
Oh, they're
What is
I want to
Anderson?
say 27, I think I read today.
20, that's it, with between all the townhouses and all the houses?
Maybe not. Maybe that was just section 8 housing or subsidized housing or workforce.
So, I mean, I would, like, what is Anderson Hill? Like, how many units are there? Does anyone know?
Yeah, I would say more, I'm just guessing.
I mean, because there's a couple different, where there's a couple rows of townhouses, right? And then there's, I mean, there's not a ton of, there's not a ton of houses, but I don't know, it might
Yeah,
be,
I know.
I'll say 50,
Those aren't bad, but I don't.
But they're not on sewer, right?
huh?
They're not
But I
on
think
sewer.
something like that would be great.
I
think
think
it
Townhouse-
fits our
Townhouses are definitely not on sewer.
Appeal.
the
Yes.
townhouses
We can
are
have
not,
it
so they
be
have a
like-
septic.
They're on septic.
Apartments, townhouses.
I've looked at the house.
But what I'm,
you
it's more
know,
about
senior,
the, like,
ranch living.
that's
Right.
50
But
units
in
that
town,
is
in the-
done
where they get
really
there,
well.
they-
And it takes up, it's not, you know, so do we have a space where 100 housing unit could go that's done really well, that's not, we're not talking, we're gonna build, you know, a 50-story building with 2 units per floor, like, you know, that wouldn't make sense, but that, the point is, or is there a way to do something that makes sense? So that's the goal here, that's the tricky balance, right? Of saying, what can we absorb? How do we have some growth? Because growth actually doesn't just mean an increase in taxes. There's
Well,
a bliss point somewhere,
You've got to subsidize the tax base, right? And that means people or business, right?
right?
Because if the
Or both.
population and households go down, it's the same burden on less people. Which
Right.
means an increase in taxes. So
Right. And
it's got to be a gentle growth, you know, is
Yeah.
what you want.
And that's where I think if we can work on this master plan and say, this is our goal growth rate, and this is how we control it, that, you know, like, that might give some guidance, not just build in this, you know, and or here are the spots that can contain or can handle these things, and help to give that guidance, and then it's not unfeathered or untethered or whatever, unfettered.
Can we,
Have fun with you know, writing out what I say, Whitney. Spell all the words. My brain doesn't work.
out of curiosity, the suggestions, recommendations, sorry, section that
Mhm.
you put in, and that's just based off of the feedback, right? That
Yeah,
we're-
and some basic good planning.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Basic good planning.
The
Because I
basic
was
good planning and nothing that violates too much the comments that you've seen. You know, this is obviously the housing one is a place for a strong tie-in to what you're doing with your regulations. So that's something to be thought through. There, and you may have some additional, that's still a fairly rough start on those list of recommendations. There's not a lot in there about affordability, for instance, or, you know, diversity of housing stock and things like that. But there's room to build on that.
'cause I guess my only thought was, is there a way? I don't know if we put it under the recommendations or the, in general, if we had like research-based type feedback too, as far as recommendations, like here's what we're seeing from people, but so for example, right, how do you bring people into a town? Or what attracts them to move into the town? So people want, you know, opportunities, they want, and I've seen that in some of the responses, so they want, you know, certain businesses and the walkability, they want recreation, and some of them, I noticed probably know who it was from, but the comment about a rec center and wanting a, you know, all year long type of opportunity to do these things. So it's the question of, you know, is there a way to present that, I guess, without, I don't want to get away from what people are giving us for feedback, I guess, but just in that whole, again, us guiding and putting out recommendations.
So you have to, like,
How do you-
when people are
you know
giving
what I'm saying?
feedback, you've got to take you can't zero in on, like, you got to take that bigger view. People are interested in our recreation. Okay, like versus like, I want this right here and that, like, that's like all reading through all these comments is good, but take a step back from them.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And like, and say recreation is a priority. We
Right.
know that. We've seen it over and over. Everybody's got different ideas of what that means. There are people who don't like tennis courts and there's people who like tennis courts. Doesn't matter. We're not gonna give recommendations to build tennis courts.
I like
You
that
know,
one. I was
like,
like,
but we know that recreation is a priority. And so that other specific work gets done somewhere else. We can give recommendations of like, you know, supporting a rec department or, you know, like that kind of stuff. And there might be some goals of, but like, it's
well, I'm not saying like use those, I'm just,
right.
there's, because you said there are multiple, it's pretty clear people do feel strongly about recreation, and I know it's gonna have its own chapter,
Mhm.
but is there a recommendation, like, as far as housing, right, that we have the guidance, but how do you bring people? You have to have a plan to build it, but you also have to have people that want to come move here. So where does that go? Like, how do you put that in there, say, or help
If you
educate
build
or
a bigger
guide?
town type of deal.
Yeah, I don't know
So-
if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm getting to the right thing.
One thing that could be, where a paragraph could be added, would be either the inventory of trends or perhaps the perspective of priorities. Outlining, you know, why do people like their housing in Enfield so much? And that's going to touch on a few things, including they like the setting, they like the recreation. And then, you know, some of the housing recommendations clearly address, that are already written down, address the setting, you know,
Yeah.
like flooding, avoid flooding areas, avoid steep slopes, like that's addressing the setting. So then adding a recommendation around, partnering with groups to expand recreation opportunities. Could follow a paragraph of discussion about why people love living in Enfield. One of the recommendations is basically keep making it, keep doing what we've been doing on recreation and expand that.
Yeah, all right. I guess,
Because I think you're right. I think why people like their housing is very relevant to a housing chapter.
Correct.
Because that's giving the perspective and why are we doing this at all, right? Because people enjoy living there.
right, and we want to attract
Right.
more people to help tax base and
Yeah.
continue town.
And sort of to give an answer to one of your previous question about one of the best paragraphs in here, which I think is what we can do. A lot of people, they may not get into the details, but they want to know people are, taking their concerns into consideration and being diligent about it. And so what we can do is be conversant in a lot of data we have collected. Like on page 1, the last full paragraph is an excellent paragraph where it outlines, yeah, we hear all about the housing shortage. And it brings it down to, brings the perspective down to Enfield will need to do 10 houses a year to do our fair share of addressing that. And all of a sudden it's manageable, right? 10,000 houses are needed. That's not possible. Oh, we need 10 a year in Enfield, right? It's like, people may still not like that number, they may disagree with it, but it becomes a very manageable number. And if we have that number when we talk to people and we have a citation of where that number came from, then people will have confidence that, there's a group working on it diligently, they're conversant in what's going on, they're listening, and I may disagree with them, but at least there's a good group, working on it in a diligent manner. And it's not some huge untractable problem that there's nowhere to start. So I think that's the biggest thing we can do is break these down and like, okay, just continue to follow the data and break it down, and then you end up with these very tractable problems. I mean, 10 houses a year doesn't sound impossible, but
Right.
10,000 does.
I think a lot of this comes from I've said it before, comes from the state. And because they've made all these new laws about the workforce housing. So it's got all the communities talking about having more housing. And then you see, when you're talking about Dartmouth, well, in the olden days, what you did was somebody come in and want to develop and they want to make it bigger and they're going to bring more people in. They need to put in a little bit of housing to accommodate them. And I don't know what's ever happened to that happening, like it used to. I mean, whether they put in the sewer or they put the road in or something that will benefit for the town. And, so what you're saying is very feasible. But what happens is that people think of all that stuff that comes with, it's every day. It's every day. It's every newsletter I get. It's all about workforce housing. All over the place, but nobody talks about how they're going to do it. So it's a push from the government. So I think we have to, don't hit ourselves in the head so much because we don't have a lot.
So
But I think it
one
can
of
be
the-
done just like you say.
one of the interesting points on the workforce housing front is how much of your current inventory of housing technically meets the definition of workforce housing, but how it is becoming increasingly unaffordable. So one of the things that often, the groups that are very focused on housing and the housing affordability often really focus on new housing, but maintaining the existing stock of affordable housing and keeping it affordable is actually something that's more achievable at the local level in many ways than getting a lot of new housing. And if you lose an affordable housing unit, you're now -1. And so however many you needed, you now can minus, you've got to add an additional one. So that's something, if the community has interest in sort of local solutions for housing affordability, is really looking in at what can be done to maintain the affordability of existing homes. And there are actually some interesting and innovative ideas out there. I think Philip has his hand up on the Zoom.
Yes, I do. And talking about affordability, I ran across an interesting statistic last week. It was an old man who kept track of all the expenses of living in his home for 80 years. And they graphed it out. And I would like to share that with you. And I think that might be something interesting if we could find something similar in Enfield to see, what are actual housing expenses? What's the ratio of our prices? Notice how in 2000, everything started taking a real jump up. Look at the big chunk, real estate taxes went up. And I know as far as water and sewer, this band is a bit wider in Enfield today because our water and sewer bills are going up faster than inflation. But I just found this to be an interesting statistic. And if we could come up with a similar number for our master plan, we could start looking at ways to mitigate. If we got something that's way out of line or so, look for ways to, in our master plan, to mitigate some of those expenses to make housing more affordable. So that's basically what I had to share. Don't know if there's anybody that's kept that many records here in Enfield, but it would be
It's certainly possible to look at the taxation side of the question, at least in terms of, there certainly is a widespread perception that taxes have been going up and that those costs are becoming an increasing burden. I think you've probably got that message pretty clearly from the survey results. The extent to which that's borne out and the extent to which it's municipal versus school, these are interesting questions. I had started to do a little bit of that work, see if there's something there that's worth digging into. And so I have been able to go back sort of through the 2000s with the taxes. And municipal tax rate has been going up after adjusting for inflation, but at a much lower rate than the rate that the school rate is going up. So the school rate's going up above inflation much more quickly, which is not atypical at all, and is the norm. And of course, people just sort of see the property tax bill and don't necessarily allocate that out separately or really track how the two components, the municipal component and the school component, are contributing to that bill. So that's certainly a tie-in between housing chapter and other aspects of the plan that we could look at.
Any other thoughts or comments about housing and the information that Brandy has sent to all of us at this time? This is not the last we will be discussing it, so but by any means, but anything else that popped out to you, you have questions about, or
I just have one question, I guess, if we've got a minute.
Yeah.
Page 2, the last paragraph is another excellent paragraph, by the way. I just wonder if you have any insight. So it's, 80% of our housing units were assessed below 320, but half of the units that were sold last year were above. Is there any insight? Is that expected to be an anomaly or sustainable? Is there any insight into that difference? Because we only sell expensive houses. I know not lots of houses change hands in any given year, so it could very well be a statistical anomaly. But is there any insight into that discrepancy that sort of arose last year in 2021?
So that's a really good question. So the last 2020 and 2021 were abnormal years in the real estate market, and there was a sudden spike in demand in the Upper Valley that I think we're all fairly aware of, and a run up in values. And there was a lot of properties that sold for twice the assessed value in Enfield and things like that. So there was a big gap between assessed and sales. I don't think that that's actually unusual for an atypical. I think probably the same thing was happening in most of the surrounding towns. So it's a question of whether the market's going to return back to where it was in 2019 or if it's going to stay at this new sustained level. Typically, the housing market stays once it's spiked. It doesn't drop. It doesn't drop. It stays. And there's some financing reasons why that is the way it is. And then at some point, you will get out of whack enough between your assessments and sales that they'll reassess, and then a pie will get redistributed again, and you'll have a new base of assessed value. But it might be possible. I'll have to get together with Rob and see what kind of data we can come up with. It might be possible to look back a couple more years, so get to 2018 or 2019 and try to see if those sales were substantially above the assessed values as well. So sort of before this COVID-related change in the real estate market happened. I suspect they were probably a bit higher, but not as substantially higher as what I can see from the 2021 sales. And the other interesting point that maybe to be make there about the workforce housing is that the state's definition of workforce housing, it includes housing that most people, if you were they were asked to define what affordable housing is, this is not the housing that they would, values that they would subscribe to being affordable. It goes, well into the moderate income range of housing, that definition of workforce housing. So that's an important criteria to keep in mind, and remembering that you actually, I haven't pulled the numbers yet, but we will pull those and have a chart. If 320 is the upper ceiling right now of what meets that definition of workforce housing, how much of your housing stock is sort of in the top 10% of that range versus being distributed throughout the range a little bit more. So is it sort of just on the edge of meeting that target, or do you really have a broader disbursement across price point in the existing housing stock? So those could be some good things that some charts and tables will help you get a better understanding of.
So one of the things that's percolating in my head, and I'm not going to say this properly, so I'm just kind of trying it out here, is, there's a lot of, I know from people I know that there's been comments about senior housing, and Brandy, you mentioned this a little bit before. We don't have like sort of, different stages of life have different housing needs. And we do have a lot of people that are staying in homes that they raised families in and whatnot. And I think we hear from a lot of those folks complaints about the increase of housing costs. And it's, even though but some of that's, they have a decrease of income due to retirement and whatnot. And so the proportion of their income to their housing cost has changed because housing does go up, but also their income has gone down just by nature of stage of life. But we don't have housing for them to move into, nor do they necessarily want to, because like this is the house that we've so I feel like some of the stagnation that we're having is and the struggles is self-imposed in a way, but we don't have we also have a lot, and back when Phil and Dan did the initial demographic, we know that we have an older population, we have more older in the 65 and older or 70 and older range. We have more single women who are still living in large houses, and again, my mother is one of them, like So I'll just use that example, but she doesn't exactly have a place to move into. Because, and she would love to have not necessarily Twin Pines senior housing, those kind of, but she wants a development where there are small bungalows and she could have her own yard and her dog and blah, 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 but be near her friends and not have a 2-story, 230-year-old ginormous house to take care of and 20 plus acres of land. But we don't actually have that available for people to move into. So we do have we have an aging population that are staying in homes. So again, so to me, some of the solutions is trying to build housing that people could relocate into. We did have, I can't remember her name, Shaker Hill Road, Neely, no, she just moved.
Oh,
Yeah. So, but like,
Cronin
say,
went.
huh?
Cronin went.
Like just again, big giant house, husband passed away. She has now moved around the corner into a house that's much more single
Yeah.
floor, and you just more size appropriate, I guess might be the right
Yeah.
word. Manageable, that's the word I'm looking for. But we don't have a lot of that, so we don't have a way for our aging population. And so, yeah, there is a lot of stagnation. And so some of the struggle between everything becoming unaffordable is also because you don't have as much income coming in. After my dad passed away, my mom's income has decreased. She doesn't get his full pension anymore. So, I don't know. Throwing that out. How about that?
The other thing is that with this talk about workforce housing, why can't we accomplish some of this through grants and HUD and things like that nature? That where we could, or have somebody build them with help from the government and the grants, and
Well, workforce
put a limit
and
on the
government
amount of
subsidized
rent.
housing are two different things. I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Workforce housing is not the same as government subsidized. That's not all Section 8 and whatnot.
I'm
Like,
talking about get the buildings built.
yeah, just to have the loans and things like that to do. So,
I think part of that is kind of what we talk about, which is attracting the contractors and the builders. You have to be able to give them a reason to want to come to your town and build it.
They gotta
And-
make a profit.
Yeah, and so it's,
Right.
I think that's we can't have people who are, not that they're really doing this, but, like picketing because, they're gonna be a contractor and you're building a giant, without really knowing the facts. It's, I heard you're putting in 100+ units and I don't want that, but, it's that we don't really have an economic development committee in the town. We have Eva who has one, but I mean, they only have so much power, contribution with it. Yeah, no power. But they're a group that gets together and talks about it, but where's the plan? The town's not necessary. I mean, Rob is there, but so I think that's part of the reason though, right, is or the delay.
A lot of it comes to what Brandy was telling us earlier, that like, they're really not gonna consider something that's less than 20 units.
Mhm.
And if you look at where an infield is zoned, that you could build a 20-unit on water and sewer, there might be 3 lots in town that are zoned in a way where you're allowed to do that.
Mhm.
And so that would be an outcome of this, would be a recommendation to change some zoning in some specific areas along water and sewer to allow this type of project to even be an option.
Yeah.
Because today, why won't they do it? They're not allowed to.
Yeah.
It's actually very simple.
And then the government funds need to be available and you have to have a contractor and there has to be some incentives to do it. Because when I was at the very beginning of the work that Ashley and I were doing, I sat down with a local contractor and he's like, I spend just as much money to build a house in Boston as I do in Enfield, and I'm gonna get 5 times as much. You know what I mean? Like the lumber costs the same.
Yeah.
So so it is profit driven, but if there are government programs and things that are happening and we can help to, I think some of the, what's that, the one project that's happening in Lebanon, and we've talked about this, that they bid out and my brain is still foggy, it's not working yet. Rob, help me,
Spencer Street. is
Maybe,
that what you're talking about?
maybe, like they're having a brown,
Yes.
whatever,
Spencer Street.
20 Spencer Street.
Yeah.
Brownfield.
brownfield, thank you. I'm still working out of the
Still
fog.
trying to clean that up. It's not completely clean.
Right, but the process of
RFP.
doing that, yes, was, and they created incentive, they created a bit of a bidding war or whatever, right? Because they gave incentives for people to build there.
Which we have touched on too, I think, for economic development. We talked about what kind of incentives do we have to bring
And,
businesses.
and we would have to
town, too. It's
identify
just
those
like the
areas,
same-
so one
yeah.
is on Shed Street, I know there's an area that could be, but it has to be zoned right. So, multi things, okay. 7:15, is there any other things that were pulled out for housing at this point in time? Okay, hearing none? Huh?
Let's move on.
Let's move on. Did we want to touch on anything land use right now? Your week is next week. Dave and I, we just put it on there to,
We could.
we weren't sure we were gonna have a robust housing conversation, so.
So let me bring this up here for my own edification. Celie and I spent a few hours at the end of last year, I guess it was, just trying to outline what the land use section might talk about. Brandy, do you have that document that you could screen share with the rest of the group?
I think I can pull it out here if you just give me a moment.
Okay. And I'll just kind of start reading it while you're pulling up the document. Basically, I think we want to talk about the fact that Enfield, in terms of natural constraints and hazards, the town has, mountain ranges between 89 and 4A. And it has Lake Mascoma, and all of those are sort of barriers that separate the town rather than bring it together. We think we should talk a little bit about barriers to development, and those would include steep slopes, wetlands, prime wetlands, hydric soils, lakes and streams, wildlife habitat and wildlife corridors, agricultural soils. Thank you, Brandy. Floodways and floodplains, of which there are a lot, and hazardous waste polluted lands. Also, we have a lot of public and conserved lands, state owns, Upper Valley Land Trust. There are big blocks of land south of Mascoma Lake. And then there's also other private lands that are under conservation easements. We thought we'd talk a little bit about the historical settlement patterns and how they evolved over time. And I guess you guys can read that for yourselves. This is not necessarily in chronological order, but we were just putting down ideas. Recent development trends, we looked at Anderson Hill Road, the Lakeview condos, Shaker Village, Lower Shaker Village, Prospect Pines, Eastman, some scattered single-family homes, and lakes transitioning to year-round housing. And we identified non-conforming lot sizes as a big issue and a hindrance to development. particularly in the lake areas and also in the village, particularly in the areas that are on town water and sewer, where we have a half-acre minimum lot size. And we think, and the planning board also thinks, that we can go down to an 1/8 acre minimum lot size. And we're actually going to be holding a public hearing on that on Wednesday as a potential zoning ordinance change or addition that the town will vote on at March meeting. Future land use, as I said, increased density in areas with water and sewer, with auxiliary dwelling units, mother-in-law apartments, maybe take some carriage houses, garages. Those kinds of structures are potentially convertible to residential. And I think that might be a recommendation that we want to put into the master plan. We want to talk a little bit about commercial, non-retail type development along the 89 corridor. I think we looked at Methodist Hill as a potential area for more residential development. And we want to talk about recreation as a prime land use in the town. We want to talk about trails on conserved lands and state lands. And why did we put golf course there? Steve?
We have one.
I know
We
we
don't
have
have
one.
a well back down.
Anyhow, that's
You could add ski area there too.
Yeah, right.
key area, yeah.
We have one of those
Oh.
too.
Okay.
No, actually it does. It goes down.
Yeah, it does.
It's there.
Yay.
It's there.
Recreation side of the
So recreation, we have golf course, lakes, and whaleback as basically as our current and areas for concentrating recreational development, perhaps improving, perhaps using them as sales points, as it were, to draw people to the town, both as residents and as visitors who could then use some of the services and stores and restaurants and that kind of thing that we would like to have. So
Can you, would you consider adding, because it's already space as well, would be like our park, like we have Hughes Park and Shaker Rec, which I think they do exist, but I think again, they could be utilized more fully, and then the next person can take that on. That's where I'm at. Leave a,
What would you call a soccer field on?
That's
that's
the Shaker Ball.
that's the Shaker
Shaker
Rec
Ball
field. And it has the,
Is that the school? Who owns?
oh wait, where are you talking? On Route 4 or on 4A?
4A.
That's the Shaker Rec field, that's the town's. And that is, we have softball, we have baseball, we make soccer fields, we have a volleyball court.
It's underutilized.
And the town owns the property all the way over to the dog.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
including the dog park.
Right.
Yeah, I have thoughts and ideas,
It is very underutilized.
and yeah,
It's utilized when there's sports in town, like
they use
happening.
sports
And
program.
some
will use
people
it,
play
but
there, but like it's
yeah.
underutilized completely.
Okay, I just added.
Yeah, it's definitely something that,
Can you scroll up to the recent developments? There, just right to the, let's see.
You missed.
No, I'm just noticing, I don't think any of those are even from this century.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Recent developments are all the
So-
1980s.
It's relative.
But I think that's a, well, which, so Anderson Hill was in the 90s, Lakeview was in the 80s, Shaker Village was in the 80s.
80s.
I don't know when Prospect Pines was put in. Eastman started in the 70s.
Right.
And can Eastman fully be
So I
counted?
guess I'm just trying to point out that
Section
recent may not be,
The lakes transitioning for year-round housing certainly has been common in the last 2 decades.
yes, that,
Yeah.
yeah. But I guess I'm just
Yeah.
noticing that the list, the big developments we think of were at the most recent 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, there's a lot of, and as I think what Bridget's been pointing out, there's a lot of misconception that we're building lots of big things, that our population, that we're building, and like, actually, when we look at this, and part of this education is that we're not, and so the
Population is
strain
going
on
down, people.
But
It's not just population, but it's the unit sizes,
but framing also matters. So calling
Framing,
those
right.
recent.
yeah,
right,
Yeah,
right,
I hear you.
So there's
I
a
hear you.
framing thing there. Like for some people, yes, that will be very recent, but for most people, that will not.
That, okay.
Well, they can see the different.
It is
types that
ancient
we have.
history.
Right, no, it's worth having a list of them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
put it
just-
under something
but
else.
Eric's
We
point
just
is,
changed it.
yeah,
Yes.
not so. Exactly.
But even putting dates on them so that people can see for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What the, like.
Yep.
And Maynard is correct. The transition to year-round housing is a trend for the last 2 decades.
Yeah,
So,
and, you know, I think now that you make your
Oh, really
point,
cool, making those into a
You
timeline,
can see that
Yeah,
all of the
yeah.
stuff happened. to
like
you
when
versus-
That's a
did
good
houses
idea.
built?
That's a good
Do
idea.
a,
Makes a difference.
So-
You're listing it.
yeah,
I think
Put
that
the
I'm going to
numbers.
be able to make you a map that shows sort of eras of housing. It won't show that transition probably in the lake area but it will show when these sort of larger areas got built out, and probably some other subdivisions as well. You'll sort of see come on, you know, at different eras. So I think that's going to be coming up, assuming that I can get all this data crunching in the right direction.
I guess I always think, like we were saying, in a time where there's so much information and everybody's inundated, what's the easily digestible pieces? Like your pages, Brandy, are really nice, right? You have like the pie charts and the graphs, and it's very pleasing to the eye. It's not loaded with words, and people can still get information from it. So as
well, that's our point here, of
And
this
that's-
master plan. But
right,
people
and
also
that's-
have to read it, and
Well-
then they have to believe it, because they like, a lot of this stuff is just, oh, I heard that the master
Yeah, I know.
plan is gonna be widening Lock Haven Road. Where, like,
that was my favorite with the
Yeah,
response.
who is it? We're not, we're not going to, but but that's
Right.
the rumors, you know, or the master plan is just a bunch of people that wanna build high-rise houses.
yeah.
Again, we're not gonna be able to fight that. We can build the best thing and make it really digestible, which is why we're doing that. And then people have to read it, and we can't force them to. Unfortunately, we just have to build the best thing we can.
I guess it's more of an appeal probably to planning board than anyone is keeping it relevant, because we'll have these pieces, but if it's bound in a nice thing that is, you know, like we've talked about, yeah, we'll check on, they'll be utilizing parts
Well,
of
it's
it.
gonna be on our website.
Put it back.
But I, you know, what I'm saying, like, where are the bits that you can educate people with around town? The people, we have an aging population. They're not gonna go on the website necessarily. Trust me, they're not gonna go on the website. So I guess that's my, like, we
That's
have
the
these
whole-
nice things that we're creating. Can
But
we?
but that's the whole big question. We
Get
can't
it
force
somewhere?
people to educate themselves. Like, I mean, where do we put information in this day and age of information? Whether it's everywhere, unfortunately, we've lost a central piece of when people used to go to one spot to get it, and now there's 50 places you can go. Like, we're gonna have a good website, we're gonna have these kinds of things, and whether or not people pick up on that, that's not our responsibility. I mean, we can do our best. And we're gonna give a presentation at town meeting, which 75 people out of 5,000 are gonna go to.
No,
You know, but we can't do it, and that's not our goal. Like, I don't, let's not get bogged down in that right now. Unfortunately, things are electronic. You know, we do not have the ability to print this and put it in every single door.
Okay.
Or we
That's
ask
okay.
the
They
town
wouldn't-
for more
they
money.
wouldn't
but we can have a executive summary printed and available to people who want it.
Sure.
Yeah, and have printed copies at a library that is a good library that people will go to. Because we still have a community where a lot of people don't have regular, convenient internet access.
Sure.
As much as we may have it, a lot of people don't.
Absolutely. And that's why we're not putting this up on Facebook or da-da-da. Like, there's gonna be multiple sources, but I don't want to actually get bogged down in that today. It's good thoughts. Let's keep our opinion that, because running farmers markets and all of that kind of stuff, I've been dealing with it for years. Like, I put out 20 signs, and I've had people on my face going, well, I didn't see the sign.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, but you're here. But I didn't, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So
I get the,
like, we
I get it
can't-
with recreation
like
too.
that's just spinning our wheels right now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's another asset, by
Mhm.
the way, are the market baskets and the people that are making all the, and that to me is
Sure.
a seller for the town. You know, you could have your own garden, that's what the environment is.
Right.
around
And that's
here.
part of our economic development, and that's part of community development. Like, some of this stuff is housing, there's transportation, but there's this bigger picture too of building this community and really kind of re-energizing it. You know, it's interesting how Enfield sees itself and then how it also is. I'm really interested in Littleton, New Hampshire. There's just so much going on there, and I was just looking it up, and it's like their website, they've got whole campaigns. So it's such a juxtaposition when people are like, we don't need flowers downtown to like this other towns that are doing a lot of stuff that build town community. And so this is part of that bigger piece of the master plan is economic development is building town community and building town pride and some excitement and selling ourselves. That's what town did you all go to?
Bristol,
Bristol.
Yeah.
that's
Bristol.
what they did.
That's some of that energy there.
Yeah.
That's what Lebanon does.
It's not, yeah, go, you know, it's not, and it's not just about counting housing units, even though that's part of it, but selling ourselves. That's how we make ourselves become a desirable place, but also following through and not saying we're really nice and then just being really mean all the time.
I think it's great if you stay at circus level. Don't get involved.
Let's move on. Thank you for the update. We'll do more on land use. We had on returning business, I wasn't here for the first conversation of transportation, but if we needed to revisit anything, David filled me and said it was a very thorough conversation, but just to just like to touch back really quickly while it's still fresh. Obviously, nothing is completed. We will continue to go back to things, but is there more transportation? Is there more information?
Yeah, I didn't have anything else.
Okay. Are there any questions that came up in people's minds after the last discussion on 27th?
So basically, everybody seems to be happy with.
There's a few holes
With the
in it
transportation.
still.
Yeah.
See, count to 10, people
Right.
talk, go ahead.
But Randy's working on it. so
Okay,
I
okay,
think most of that will be, Jim Taylor will provide some of that stuff. And I think she has some questions on the capital improvement piece, but other than that,
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking at the public transportation thing too, which I know gets mentioned over and over again.
Mhm.
And that's just another piece of selling ourselves, right? Is, I guess.
well, I think one of
Whole
the
campaign going on in
recommendations
my brain
that
right now.
we should have in the plan after the transportation piece is finalized is one, increasing the routes to down 4A to get to La Salette, and maybe possibility increasing what we provide to advanced transit in terms of
Mine
annual-
is just making streets safer. Like as a, obviously it was front page news today, yesterday, Thetford? No, where was it? The gentleman who got hit on the side of the road,
Yeah.
Thetford,
Someone got killed down in Newport last
someone
week.
got killed down in Newport, and a cyclist got killed. I thought that was that near Plainfield?
It was in Newport.
That was Newport, oh, the cyclist was Newport. like, you know, as a cyclist who needs to train for another long bike ride, like I like street riding versus the rail trail, like, and I obviously we had the waffle incident, horse incident,
I mean, I would agree with you.
just creating safe streets, like to me for transportation is, because people are angry and they're terrible drivers and they're looking at their phones and they're angry. They just hate.
You know, yes, I think creating safe streets and awareness of a couple of things. Because I mean, Friday, the weather was not great. I think it was, right? Was it
Mhm.
Friday? Whatever day
Yes,
it
I
was.
didn't leave the house.
Yeah. And I'm watching the plow truck come by, and then I get a little further down, and there's somebody walking on the side of the road, and I was like, I get that you want to get out and get your exercise. I can imagine the plow truck loved coming up on them because there's nowhere to go, and that's where like the safe streets comes in. You're on Shaker Hill Road. There's nowhere to go because there are snowbanks, and you want to go out and get a walk, and that's great. Maybe not in the snow, but that's your prerogative as long as you can do it safely. So I think the education piece is kind of where that comes in. Like, why do we want safe streets? Because, and then again, the awareness of public transportation. We're going to put our money in, like, that's, you know, we want to be green. We want to give people other options.
All right, we wanted to have a quick discussion, focus group discussion, other public sessions. We put money, we still have money in the budget. We put some, we dedicated it to creating focus groups. Do you want to take this? part?
Yeah, I mean, last time we kind of started thinking about it. The ideas we came up were potential mailings, door tags, door-to-door canvassing, and potentially some focus groups in the January, February timeframe. And I think we kind of decided that there might be two different things that we have to be concentrating on. One is reaching out to people who are renters and getting them involved in our discussions. And then the other thing that we wanted to accomplish was taking draft chapters and holding focus groups and get feedback from people and say, did we get this right? At least as far as the dozen people or 20 people or however many people come. And we were kind of talking of doing those in the January, February timeframe so that we could have something for town meeting in March. But as Lindsay said, the pressure is 98% off on that. So we might want to revise that schedule to March, April, or February, March, April, something like that. But, you know, the basic question, which I asked everybody to think about between the last time we met and tonight, was, you know, what kinds of things do we want to accomplish other than what we came up with last time? So floor is open. Anybody have any more thoughts?
I think the idea of focusing on the individual chapters is good. It continues us down the path towards, you know, completing the plan. That, okay, we've done it. Now, you know, here's a draft. What do you think? I think that's an excellent idea. I don't know exactly how you do it, but I think that's a good direction.
Okay. Brad, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I think it's the way to do it. I think that you're certainly going to get people there that are concerned about that particular chapter, and you'll hear from them for sure, I think. But the way to approach it, like you said, David, is did we get this right? And you'll hear for sure.
Yeah.
So my thought for focus groups is it's not an open meeting to whomever just shows up. It's an invitation. So I would almost do it like we formed this group, where we can put something out on listserv. We can allow people to say they're interested in and what chapter they might be interested in. We also get a little bit of information, age, like what kind of segment of the population do they represent?
Yeah.
So everyone in this room was picked, and Zoom, sorry, Paul, and Zoom, was picked for specific reasons. We represent different segments of the population. Because what I don't need, what I don't think we need is the same 5 voices
That's a good point.
that always have something to say,
Sure.
whether it's positive or negative, but the same 5 voices that represent all the same cohort,
Yeah.
that we want to get a mix of.
What are you
folks.
thinking of for number of people, 8 to 10 or
8 to
smaller?
10,
larger?
8 to 10 tops. You just don't want more than that. And again, it's a point for feedback, but we want to be really careful that we're not jumping at everything that every person says. Like it's that we get good stuff, that we have a discussion.
Well, like I said
Um,
last time, that there's some differences, at least in the transportation,
Sure.
between what the survey said and
Right?
what Eric and I heard over and over and over.
Absolutely.
So it'll be interesting.
Right. And so I think it's the, I think we should look at doing this no sooner than March, because it will take some preparation. We've got kind of March and April, so it'll give us time to, get a little bit more. But we really work on recruiting and we figure out what are sort of the segments of the population that we need to fill. So what are the chairs, that if you have 10 chairs at the table, we want a cyclist. So we're doing transportation. We want someone who regularly uses public transportation.
Yep.
We want someone that commutes a far way. We want someone who works from home. Maybe we have to kind of identify
Yep.
what are some of the differences, different age ranges. Some, people who have kids, and we want to have that table. So we have a diverse, and we always have to think about who's not here. What voices are we not hearing, and try to create that. So then, don't get, so it's got to be 10, but I would challenge each subcommittee to start to think about what are kind of, and we could do it not just the regular demographics of age, gender, age and gender, we'll just start there. But how does it pertain to your chapter? And then kind of, we can compile those lists and make a form and say, we're looking for people to participate in focus groups, and we might do a general call for it. And then if we don't get people who fill that, then we go and ask. Like, I know somebody who fills this role, and I'm going to ask them specifically to come in. Would be the way I would do it. I'm interested to Brandy or anybody else have thoughts on that.
I think that your approach seems like a good one, to think of it as an invite, so that you can really try to think about who it is you want to hear from. Maybe try to broaden a little bit from the volunteer base that you normally get.
And always start making that list and really go, who's not here? What voice have I not heard? What voice have I not heard? And ask yourself that question 3 times at least, because that's the important voice that we need to hear, is the ones that we don't always hear from. So it'll take a little bit of thinking for sure.
And you can, ask people for recommendations too.
Yeah.
In terms of trying to broaden out your own social networks a little bit, and use that to sort of try to get to some people that you haven't heard from.
Absolutely, because I'm gonna go from what I know, but again, my blind spot is what I don't know. So try to I might not know who's not at the table because I can't think of them.
So what are you asking us to do? Think of people that can.
Yeah, so if you were putting together a focus group, don't worry about the individual persons and don't worry about the number of seats at the table. If you're putting together a focus group to look at land use, and you can take that list that you have, and maybe we don't have a person from Eastman, a person from Anderson Hill, a person, but we might want somebody who lives in a housing development community, a not so new one. We might
Like you.
we want but what what would constitute different voices? We don't want the entire conservation committee to come, but maybe you want somebody from the conservation committee. Maybe you want a developer.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you want
We
so you want a
hunter.
conservationist, you want a developer, you
hiker.
want a hunter, a hiker, you want someone who lives in
Bicycle person.
yeah, so that, start making that list.
Mhm.
There might be somebody that counts as two of those, but you know, we won't worry about the digital people, but what's that list look like? Thinking that really you don't want more, I mean, you really don't want more than 12. It starts to get really noisy when you have too many people.
We need to have a farmer.
Right, a farmer, absolutely. You don't need all their chickens with them, that a farmer would be.
Garden products.
Yeah, so exactly, you're already making that list. Write down anything you can think of. And then some of them might overlap, and that's what we're gonna say, if you fill this role and want to help us with this focus group, you know, because we don't want just all the same folks that, and not that their voices aren't important, but how are we gonna get this right is how are we listening to enough voices? The people see themselves somewhere. They may not see themselves in every line of that chapter, but do they see themselves somewhere represented in a way? So that's my homework for you. Okay. Public comment period. We don't have a care. Any other things that are on anyone's mind that we need to cover today or would like to see on future agendas or anything like that?
I don't know. Maybe this is for David. I'm just thinking out loud, so to speak. Things like, what would attract people to this town? Okay, so I was talking about, you can garden, you can have a place for your own garden, you know, that kind of thing. There's attributes that we do in the
Yeah,
town that we
right.
like.
Access to recreation.
Yeah, the town
Yeah, but
attributes.
that's that, but then you got the people that are, you know, they want to get out and run, or they want to have their own food
Yeah.
and grow their own food or have
So
access to
we-
food. I mean, people that are coming up and buying a land around, that's what they want. They want their own little world.
Some of them, but not all. So we have to remember, this is a master plan. It's not I think, as Randy said the one time, we're not doing a brochure, an Enfield.
It's not a sales.
It's not a
pitch.
sales pitch. But yes, part of what makes Enfield a great place to live, or
Yeah.
why people live here, and that has come through in the survey, and that continues to come through. But it is why some people live here, but some people live here because it's on the bus line. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't have gardens, so there's different values.
Oh, I know that,
Sure.
but it's just some people that do want it. and I mean, there's a variety and so on.
Yeah.
The other thing we haven't mentioned, I think is important to this whole process, is climate change. And I think the thing that in climate change would be very beneficial for Enfield. And part of that is the trees, the forest. What are we getting from them? It's the clean air, it's what it does to everything. It also cools.
Mhm.
So and we have this, so I think it's important that we really try and preserve it as much as we can. In a way, whether it's, you know, whether it's building or whether it's education, but it's very, very important. I really think that, so we all know that we're already off a degree or so.
But
The
so
weather's not cooperating.
is that something that kind of plays into the land use chapter as well, or is that a little
Yeah.
off?
It goes throughout
I mean,
the
it will,
whole
yeah.
thing. I mean, you're talking land use, you're talking housing in terms of energy efficiency, you're talking transportation in terms of bus lines, carpooling, electric vehicles, and making charging available for those. It just permeates
Yeah.
everything. At least that's the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, climate change,
Wait till
climate
tomorrow.
resiliency, whatever the current term is,
Yeah,
we need to include it.
And that's in our values. That's in those guiding principles. It's there. So if we go back, so it's there and it needs to be through each chapter, but we identify, recognizing our important, the role of, we'll be committed to promoting energy efficiency, environmentally progressive strategies and clean and renewable energy resources and solutions. That's in our
okay,
guiding principles. We do identify, which is where is the first introduction to it.
yeah.
It'll be more robust when we have an energy chapter, but yes, as we do each chapter, that's probably a common theme. So how it relates to land use, how does it relate to transportation, those kinds of things. I think housing, when we look at those costs, what are strategies to help lower costs? Promoting solar, helps to, or other, those are all kinds of things that as a town, if we're committed to, that's going to be in those principles.
Yeah.
It's good to remind that and making sure that it's on our brains. All right, Phil or Brandy, anything else from y'all today? Okay, then do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a
I
motion to.
so moved.
All
I
right.
second it. Whatever.
Bridget moves, David seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have we